Welcome back to the OurView Podcast. On today's episode, I welcome my guest, Carden Wyckoff. Join our conversation as we discuss how she lives her best life at 6 miles per hour and the importance of advocacy work to improve the lives of those who live with disabilities. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the OurView Podcast. I am very happy to welcome my guest, Carden Wyckoff, to the episode today. And so welcome, Carden. Thank you for joining me for this great conversation tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Arthur.
You're welcome. So you and we met a few weeks ago on the app Clubhouse. I've been saying that a lot for a lot of my interviews that I've been doing lately. So it's really great to be able to connect with people who are willing to share their stories of living with disabilities. And so I'm really grateful for you taking the time out to speak with me today.
Yes, thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here and just share my story and get to know a little bit more about you as well. So,
Yeah. So can you just to start off the episode, can you just explain to people who is Carden Wyckoff?
who is Carden Wyckoff? Carden Wyckoff is a wheelchair warrior, a disability advocate based in Atlanta, Georgia. And I believe in creating a more accessible world and inclusive world for people with disabilities. I'm sure just like you are.
Yes. Yes, that is so
and
true.
Yeah, born and raised in Atlanta. I have a form of muscular dystrophy and it's called FSHD, muscular dystrophy. And I was born with it. And I was diagnosed about 9 years old. So I have a infantile onset. I was a special snowflake that was about 10% of patients with FSHD get it as an infantile onset. And I showed symptoms as early as 4.5 years old, and then just worked for those 5 years to figure out with the doctor and the researchers what the heck was wrong with me. So over time, it's a muscle wasting disease, and so my skeletal muscle in my body converts to fat, and that muscle just deteriorates away. And it's so skeletal muscle is think about your limbs and your body. So your hands, your arms, your legs, your core, your back, the muscles that help you to breathe and hold up your neck and pick your feet up when you walk. And so over time, those muscles are just withering away, and I don't really have any control over it. At this time, there's no cure. And when after college, I started using a wheelchair full time just because walking became really difficult. So that's a little bit about my progression.
Yeah, that's oh sorry. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So you said you were showing symptoms as early as 4 years old, but then it took another 5 years before you were actually diagnosed.
Yeah, exactly. Just because muscular dystrophy, I was born in the 90s,
Mhm.
early 90s, and muscular dystrophy just wasn't a topic of conversation. It was barely well known. And so doctors didn't know what it looked like in children. And they also didn't know to look for the type of symptoms. And I think the only representation that they had of muscular dystrophy was the Jerry's Kids, which was
Right.
that MDA Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon back in, I think, the 80s,
Hmm.
which my father grew up watching. And you see the adults with muscular dystrophy, and they're in wheelchairs and they're very severely disabled. But for me as a child, I was really a competitive sports player. I played soccer, basketball, softball, and I ran track through high school. Not on the track team, but I just ran for fun.
Hmm.
I was one of those kind of crazy people that enjoyed running for fun. And but it was kind of like, as I was competing in these sports, I couldn't be the strongest and the fastest and the number one player on the team. And I couldn't throw the ball far enough or shoot the ball high enough in basketball. I really struggled at free throws because I couldn't use my upper body, my muscles in my arms and in my shoulders to really propel that basketball forward and up into the air. That was a really difficult motion for me to do.
Hmm.
And so I would usually fall short in the free throws. And that was kind of something that my coaches kind of just watched very closely. And also, I think ended up telling my parents about it. It looks like she's having some trouble throwing the ball as hard and as far as it needs to go. And I remember when I transitioned from like that little league to the high school league, the height of the basketball post changed
Oh
about, I don't know,
yeah.
3 or 4 feet. And I
Hmm.
just remember that difference in height. I like literally couldn't make any free throw.
Right.
And so, that's in, when I was 11 or 12. And so up until about 14, that's kind of when I stopped playing sports
Hmm.
because it just became too difficult to run, to just throw the ball, to do those arm motions and the bat swings and stuff. So that's kind of where that progression was. And for me, symptoms showed up in my face and in my upper body. So, and then in my shoulders. So I showed scapular winging. It was very mild when I was a child, and it's
Hmm.
gotten progressed over time as an adult, just because due to the progression of the muscle wasting. And so it was things like having trouble blowing out birthday candles and whistling. I could try, but I didn't do a very good job at it. And I would kind of just like spit at the birthday candles, and I looked silly doing it. And the other thing was my eyelids wouldn't fully close at night. And so when my mom would come in at night to tuck me in or kiss me goodnight, if I had already gone to sleep, it was like as if I looked like I was awake when I wasn't, because the whites of my eyelids would show.
Oh wow.
And so that was kind of another red flag that my mom really paid attention to. And her being an amazing mother and also a helicopter mom, she was able to just do lots of research and talk with the doctors and say, this is, at the time she was substituting in elementary school. So she saw a lot of kids. She was around a lot of kids, and I seemed a little bit different, but it was very difficult to pinpoint. We met up with a researcher and clinician inside of Emory University, and she was about the only one who had studied FSHD in her postdoctorate or whatnot. And she took one look at me and said, I know exactly what you have, but we'd like to confirm that.
Wow.
And we were sent up to Rochester, New York. And so I'm based in Atlanta,
Hmm.
and flew up to Rochester, New York to be diagnosed essentially. And the doctors said immediately, we know exactly what you have. And then we had the blood work to confirm that. And all of my family members also were tested, my immediate family members, and none of them were carriers, and they don't have it as well. So I'm referred to as a spontaneous. So it happened in during when I was being conceived in utero. So spontaneous de novo mutation.
Wow. I think one of the things that you mentioned that is really important is, um, you said you grew up in the 90s, and the example that was used for muscular dystrophy was the Jerry's kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore it's like you didn't show those symptoms that people were used to seeing, so
Exactly.
it made it difficult for them to say what you had, because you weren't exhibiting any of those symptoms that people were used to seeing. So so
Mm-hmm.
that I'm glad you shared that story of how it came to be that you were properly diagnosed. It's really crazy that it took so long for that to occur, though. It's
Yeah, definitely unfortunate with the times, right? It just
right.
happened to be that it just no one knew about it. But now my friends who completed medical school and they're in the residency program, while they were doing their medical school, um, all their presentations and their coursework, they talk about FSHD muscular dystrophy, and they talk about Duchenne's, and they talk about SMA, and they talk about Becker's and all these different types of muscular dystrophies now. So students that are getting training now, they
Mhm.
are equipped with the knowledge to look for these symptoms. They may not know, every single symptom of every single type of muscular dystrophy, but there's definitely a common theme in them all is the not being able to do certain functions, and in comparison to a quote non-disabled child who functions and has that high has a high range of motion.
Right.
So we're
Yeah.
seeing a lot much better representation in early childhood diagnosis. And so I'm really thankful for that. And there's also incredible amount of research and awareness. And now everything you can Google so easily. Right, back in the 90s, like the internet really wasn't a thing.
Right.
And so, I mean, nowadays you could really just Google, like, why can't I blow out my birthday candles? And I'm sure muscular dystrophy will pop up. Like
Yes.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's great the research that has been done, the technology, the medical
Hmm.
advances that have taken place, even from when I was born 40 years ago. My parents they were told I wasn't expected to live past the age of 15, and it goes
Mm.
back to what you were saying too. It's although spina bifida is nothing new, they just still at that time they didn't have the knowledge to really know what was happening. And my parents didn't know I had spina bifida until I was born. Now they can see it on a 3D ultrasound.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's
incredible.
yeah, it's very incredible, and it's great the research that has been done. They can also do the fetal surgery
Hmm.
before the baby is born to close the hole in the back of the child who has spina bifida.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
so it's all of the things that weren't an option 40 years ago.
Hmm.
So I'm definitely hopeful that they are sharing more positive messages with the parents now that their child will have a good life and a productive life with spina bifida and other disabilities as well, just because
Yeah.
of the way things are constantly improving, which is so great to hear. And I'm excited every time I see stories that show the improvements that are being made. Yeah, so it's just really interesting, um, just because of the things that they tell our parents and the
Hmm.
things that they tell us growing up of what we would be unable to do, and just how we have pushed through it. And as you called yourself a warrior, and just got through a bunch of things and a bunch of the obstacles and challenges. I think that's really impressive for all of us who live with disabilities. I think it's just something
Yeah.
that we deserve to applaud ourselves for.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Especially growing up, I was the only one in my immediate family. And then it doesn't skip the type of muscular dystrophy that I have. It doesn't skip generations. So it's a 50% autosomal dominant. So you would be a carrier, or you would pass it on to your offspring.
Hmm.
And also, so my that means that my grandparents didn't have it on both sides. So it just happened spontaneously because my mom and dad aren't carriers either. And
Wow.
so having a very large extended family, social support was really critical, and is highly valued in my family. And so having such an amazing family to be supportive of my journey and to be there supportive, just to help out, has also been really helpful. In addition, at times I think it was very isolating, and sometimes still is today. And the reason for that is because growing up, no one in my community had muscular dystrophy that I was aware of.
Hmm.
And that's elementary, middle, and high school, at least that I in my network that I was friends with. And growing up as a child, I I don't think I was really poked fun of until later in high school, when walking started becoming more difficult. And so I started having a gait, and I waddled when I walked.
Hmm.
And that started about it started freshman year of high school, but it started getting worse about junior and senior year of high school. And I think people, and I started getting some lordosis. And so that's kind of a sway back, is what the common term is.
Mhm.
And so when I walked, I would lean back and then propel my legs forward. And oftentimes, so what that meant is that my stomach would protrude out. And so it looked like I could be seen as pregnant, but I'm a very tall and lean person
Mhm.
and was not pregnant. And so I think out in public, I would get all the time, oh, when is your baby due? Or I would get weird looks. And I knew that that's either they were looking at me weird because I walked differently or because they knew that I looked pregnant, even though I wasn't. Um, and also, if you've ever faced this, when I was in high school, I was driving and I got the accessible parking pass and a license plate. And I got so many bad looks because I was still walking, but not very well.
Mhm.
I definitely couldn't walk long distances with ease. And people would come up to me and say, that's only for wheelchair users or that's only for disabled people. And it's like, well, not everyone has necessarily a visible disability
Right.
is allowed to get that parking.
Yeah. It's really the great thing, another great thing that you just said was the support, the network of support that you had. It's very been a very common theme in my conversations I've had with people on the podcast,
Mm,
where the family support and the network of people, extended family support, has been very key to their their success and their just being able to get through life. And
mm,
also, very similar to what you said as well, I was the only person in my family of uh on my mom and dad's side, everybody, nobody else had a disability like mine.
mhm.
And even in my my network of friends and from elementary school through high school and college, even I wasn't I wasn't around people who had disabilities.
Right.
And it's so it was really, it was a good thing and a not so good thing. It was good in a way that I was thankfully I fit into a lot of different social groups in high school. So I was able to share my story and share my experience, and a lot of people had interactions with me in that way, so that it wasn't too much of a big deal about me using a wheelchair. I can remember can remember going to Florida on my senior trip, and this was we went to Disney, and we would go to the different theme parks, and everybody was like, okay, well, like, who are you going with today? Because like we want to hang out with you, and we know you ride everything. So it was like, let's all right, who gets Arthur, who's going with Arthur today? And it was like, okay, well, we can split up, and I'll meet up with you guys later. And so it was all just a it was great. I had a good experience in high school, who I'm still friends with, of a few people today I'm really close with. And um, just grateful for them and the way that they did accept me. And of course, you had the people that weren't a part of my close friends group, that they did laugh, or things like that, that I did come up against sometimes, but thankfully it wasn't too often. But the isolation part of it, where it's like nobody can really relate to what you're dealing with, what you're going through. I definitely can can relate to that as well. And even as you mentioned, even now, uh going through what we all have been through with the pandemic, and just
Yeah.
having to be in the house and all of that.
Wonderful. And thanks for adding your own personal experience onto that.
Yeah.
What's interesting in the difference in how you're treated is different when, so like for you, you were using a wheelchair growing up in childhood education, right? Elementary, middle, high, or when did you start using a wheelchair?
I started using a chair in middle school because,
Okay.
and it was really because of the school I went to was very large. There were like a couple hundred kids in the
Mm.
school, and while I'm great on my crutches when nobody's around, if I were to get bumped, not on
Yeah.
purpose, but
Mm-hmm.
or just if the tile floor in the school was wet or if somebody kicked my crutch, like I'm
Yep.
going
I know
down.
all
There's
about
no,
that. You're
yeah,
going down.
I'm going down. There's no stopping it.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
happening. So the wheelchair at first was more of a safety thing for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Got it.
just to remain, make sure that I remain safe. And I use it for long distances now. If I'm just going to somebody's house, I'll walk, I'll
Oh,
walk
okay.
into their house and things like that. But if I'm at the mall or if we're going out to the park or
Okay.
um, at a restaurant, I use it most of the time because my chair is more comfortable than a restaurant chair. So
Sure.
yeah, so I'll do that. But yeah, I still use my crutches as much as possible. I have like 5 steps to get into my apartment. So so I have to use that, and if I to walk at all, I
Got
have
it.
to use my braces. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
So
yeah, thanks. The reason I was asking is
mhm,
because so for you, you had assistive devices that you were using starting
right.
out as an early age,
Hmm.
crutches, wheelchairs, whatnot. And so I think people became comfortable, and maybe this is just my assumption, but I think people in your community and in your network became comfortable with the idea that they would see that and associate that with you.
Right.
Versus for me growing up, I didn't start using assistive devices until I started using leg braces when I was in a sophomore in college, but those
Hmm.
weren't really noticeable. I didn't start using a scooter and a wheelchair until after college. So when I was
Right.
20, 22, 23. And so it's what's interesting is I just don't think people know how to react, respond, or adjust their stance or their behavior or how far away they are from you if you have a gait. And so
Hmm.
that was me, right? So I was walking with a gait, and I'd kind of waddle from side to side. And so people would naturally avoid me to like move out of my way. But if they didn't know me, they would walk too close next to me and they would bump into me, not on purpose,
Right.
accidentally. And then it was just a domino effect. Like I was down.
Hmm.
And then getting back up, depending on where I was in my progression. In high school, I could get up and just right outside of college, I could get up on my own. But in the last 5 years, it was not being able to get up at all once I went down. So I don't know how we train the non-disabled community to help people with disabilities and the different types of ambulation and range of motion and walking ability that they have. I think it would just be helpful to do some of that training so that, don't treat me any differently, but just know that, give me a little bit more space than you
Right.
would a regular
Yeah, my
person.
personal space extends a little further than your average person. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I think we had this conversation a few nights ago in a room that I was in on Clubhouse, and we were talking about the term inspiration porn, where which is the idea that people with disabilities are inspiring just because
Yep.
they have disabilities. Um, so it was a good conversation, and um, my thought behind it, which I shared in the room, was um, first, I think people say, they're inclined to say, "Oh, you're inspiring," when they see somebody with a disability, just because they feel like they have to say something catchy instead of just saying
Mhm.
hello as if they would to
Mhm.
someone else. They feel like they have to add something extra onto it. And so, not that they don't, I don't feel that most people mean any harm by it. And then it goes back to similarly to what you were just saying, people don't know how to respond to seeing someone with a disability because, and I use the example for myself, I use my wheelchair and I'll go into the grocery store to go food shopping. I'm the only person in the store in a wheelchair.
Oh yeah, same
And
every time.
so, yeah, so it's like I don't see anybody who looks like me in a wheelchair.
Hmm.
So I'm saying like putting
Like
myself in.
never.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I can count one person in the
Right.
history of my grocery shopping since I've been alive has been like maybe one person.
Right.
And what was funny is like it always seems to be like a common theme in the wheelchair community that when you see another person in a wheelchair, you like have to gravitate towards them and like say hello and then ask what
Yes.
type of wheelchair that they have. Why is
Yes.
that always the case?
It's so true though. It's so true.
Happens every time.
And the thing is, I think that, because I think about it, if I go to the store every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks or whatever, and I never see somebody in a wheelchair, these other shoppers have most likely never run into somebody in a wheelchair in a store either. So
Oh,
to
that's
them,
so true.
so to them, it does look inspiring that somebody in a wheelchair is out food shopping. I'm like,
Wow, I never thought about that until you just said that. But wow, that must be so true.
yeah, because I'm
Because
like,
for
wait,
me, I like zoom at 1,000 miles an hour in the wheelchair.
right.
And do you know how many non-disabled people will say, "You're gonna get a speeding ticket"?
Yeah,
And
slow
I'm
down in
like,
that thing. Yeah.
I'm like, what?
But it's really, it's really interesting. And I did, like I said, I shared that in this
So funny.
clubhouse room, and so many people had the same reaction that you just had, like,
Oh
whoa,
my goodness.
like I never thought about that, where, maybe it is inspiring to them because they don't see people with disabilities. And
Hmm.
it goes back to what you were saying, having some way to educate people about the different ways that people are moving, the mobility issues that people have and the gaits that they may have, and just like you said, extending that personal space beyond, the normal place that you would have if somebody didn't show signs of having a disability. But it's just I don't know why it is, but I go out a lot. I go, well, not anymore recently, but I go to concerts, I go to sporting events, and it's the same thing. You're out in a venue with 20,000 people at a concert, and I'm sitting in the accessible seating section by myself.
Yep.
And it's
Well, the benefit to that, I will
oh,
say,
it's
because I'm very much like a concert goer and like I
oh
love
yeah.
going out and doing events, non-COVID, right? I've been in my
Yes.
house for a year.
Right.
Um, but the stages, the accessible stages that they have, sometimes if they're really great, they're right in the front
Right.
and you have this entire section to yourself that's like a good 20 feet wide
Yes.
and
All the
you can just
space.
roam around and zoom
Right.
and twirl and all kinds of stuff and have a
All the space
blast.
to do all the things. It's just so much. It is. It's so
Yeah.
much fun. But
It
I
is so much fun. There's
and I
this music venue in Atlanta
uh-huh.
that their accessible seating area is right at the front in the corner. And I would go to concerts like every week because it's just um, a local concert stage.
Mhm.
And the entire venue is totally packed in. And it's just me and this giant space. And so many people will be like, "Hey, can I come in there with you?" And I'm like, "No, it's
Right.
mine."
Right. This is my space.
This is my privilege. Get your own.
This is my space. But I think I think it's a good conversation to have because
Mhm.
people don't know how to interact with those who have disabilities because they don't see people with disabilities out doing things too much for um and it's a shame. And I think it has a lot to do with the lack of accessibility that exists. So people with disabilities are not inclined to go to concerts because they don't feel that it might be accessible for them. And the difficulty that they may run into, the hassles that they may have to face. It's like, no, I'll just stay home. Like, I don't want to deal with that. And a lot of people with disabilities are dealing with everyday kind of things. And it's just like, I do not need to add one more thing of how am I going to get into this concert venue and my seat and all that kind of stuff. So it's, I
Yeah.
think there's definitely uh, a lot of work that has to be done about bringing awareness to these types of things and educating, and which actually is a great segue into what you mentioned when you introduced yourself, saying that you were an advocate, so that you
Mhm.
advocate and you work in the area of improving things for those who have disabilities. Can you tell us more about the advocacy work that you do there in Atlanta?
Yeah. So a lot of it goes back to the point that you just made about people with disability. You don't see people out, you don't see people with disabilities, at least let's say visible disabilities,
Right.
out in public, like wheelchair users and crutches and canes and walkers and stuff like that. You don't see them out in the community as often because there's such a lack of transparency in the built environment in
Hmm.
terms of accessibility in the parking, in the entrance, in the interior, and how far away is the bathroom from when you enter. So for me, I have been through different stages physically, from being able to run and do a sports activity, to not being able to run, to walking, to not being able to walk, all the way to using a wheelchair and not being able to walk at all, not be able to stand at all on my own. And with that, I know very much about distance and balance and having those cyclic, repetitive thoughts in your head that are just so invasive and intrusive of how many steps is there, cracks, how are the people, how many people, do they know who I am, are they going to bump
Hmm.
into me, what happens if I fall, who's going to pick me up, am I able to, you're just like thinking about every little thing over and over again. It's very exhausting. And so with that, it's just there's such a lack of transparency. And so what I try to do, and I work with a local organization called I Access Life, as like a volunteer and an advocate with them. It's like an application, a mobile app that rates and reviews places on transparency in the built environment. So it's like the Yelp for disability ratings.
Oh, that's great.
And that is really empowering, at least a lot of the Atlanta area and a lot of cities around the Southeast, to be more transparent so that we can empower and encourage people with disabilities, especially those physical ones where you have these thoughts in your mind all the time about access and whether or not it is accessible or not, to make it a little bit easier for them and to also just kind of wither away those worries.
Hmm.
And additionally, what's helpful is to just be really active in your community and on social media, gathering a network of local advocacy orgs and start tweeting and raising awareness about accessibility and why it's important. So for me, I focus heavily on transit equity. And with transit equity, we're talking about rollability of our sidewalks to get to the bus and also to get to the train. And so a lot of that is partnering with our Department of Transportation and local city government, and also our local bicycle advocacy networks and other transit advocates as well. And going in and talking about the disability narrative and saying how that is so intertwined and connected into improving and creating better infrastructure for sidewalks and transit so that individuals with disabilities are able to go out and do the things that they want to do. A lot of people with disabilities are on like Medicare or Medicaid. And I personally am not, but as far as I know, those options, they only will provide transportation to your doctor's office and then to the nearest grocery store of from your house. And so there's a huge gap that we're facing in our country, especially in the United States, is the leisure activities that people with disabilities, and especially those physical ones that are visible is that they want to go out and do things like they want to go to concerts and
Mm-hmm.
music festivals and go to sports events and be safe, right? When COVID kind of ends.
Yes.
But the problem is we don't have good infrastructure in our cities across America to provide equal access to transportation, especially in the ride share as well. So
Yes.
here in Atlanta, we have deregulated our taxis and ride shares. So that means we have zero accessible ride share because there's no regulation around it because our state deregulated it. So the problem with that is I can't just call an Uber and say, come pick me up and take me to a bar a mile away or take me to the concert a mile away. I have to roll 2 blocks to go to the train, get on the train, go a few stops, and then roll on broken sidewalks to the concert venue.
Right.
And likely those sidewalks are inaccessible. They are lacking curb cuts, they're crumbled. And so I'm rolling in the streets of Atlanta and it's very unsafe.
Right.
And so tying it all back to those transit organizations, especially the bicycle orgs, is that they're huge advocates for safe streets, rollable streets, and bike lanes. And guess what? Wheelchairs can roll in the bike lanes too, which is what I do a lot in the few bike lanes that we have in Atlanta. So that's why it's so important to get connected with other organizations that use wheels like bicycles and get on their platform, start talking on their webinars and provide that narrative for the disability community because we all want the same thing at the end of the day.
Yes. And that is so great, the work that you're doing. It's so necessary, and
Thanks.
it's um it's so important. It's been 6 years, I think, since I've been to Atlanta. I have relatives that live there. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, it's like I love a city. I'm 10 minutes outside of Philadelphia. I'm like 2 hours outside of New York City. I love going to the city. It's such a great, great experience. And Atlanta was a lot of fun. And I remember um, when I was there, I went to the aquarium there, which was fantastic.
Oh,
Um,
wonderful. Yeah, it's great. I
yeah,
used to
and
volunteer there back in the day.
yeah, and the one thing I can say about the aquarium that I loved, they had these little spaces at the tanks where you could roll up, and they had like a
Mhm.
wheelchair symbol for it was
Yep.
reserved for wheelchair users to get an up close view of the
Hmm.
of the aquarium tank. So I love that that feature. But the work that you're doing, especially with the app to show that the transparency and the things that people are doing to if their places are accessible, and what they're doing to make them accessible, I think is a really great thing that needs to be rolled out to everybody everywhere.
Yeah. I'm seeing some other apps that are in the same competitive space
Hmm.
that are coming out. I know there's one in Europe that's heavily used over there. And there's a few others here in the United States that popped up over the past few years, but it's really needed. I try to post both on iAccess and Yelp because Yelp is what so many people use,
Right.
and iAccess is still growing its membership and its place in the market space.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, two of my really great friends created the app, and so I just help to. I'm like a brand ambassador. I just help to bring awareness to it, and I don't get paid for it. I'm really passionate about
Right.
transparency in the built environment and transit equity, and the only way to do that is to break down those barriers and talk about it and rate places and give your experience so that next time that you go to the restaurant on Broad Street, you know the pizza place that the wheelchair access is in the back through the kitchen around the corner and then through the side.
Right. Yes.
So don't be alarmed by the few steps that you see on the front. You can
Right.
go through the back, you know?
Yeah, it is accessible. You just have to, search for it. But
Yep.
to make people aware of that type of thing is very important.
Hmm.
You know, we can address why the entrance is where it is another time, but At least
Yeah,
they
that's a
have
whole nother
one.
conversation
Right.
that I'm trying to get Atlanta local city government to change.
Right. At
So I
least
don't
they
know if
have
you're
one.
right, exactly. So California, city of San Francisco has an accessible business entrance program. And so they have required all of their public business entrances, their primary entrance to be wheelchair accessible. And so it's a long list of criteria, and they had to get it approved and certified by either an access specialist, which they have in the state of California, or a contractor who is familiar with ADA requirements and whatnot. So
That's fantastic. That's a great start.
I
Um,
believe Dallas or maybe Austin also adopted a similar legislation. And so I'm trying to add it as well in the city of Atlanta, getting some pushback. It's difficult right now because of COVID, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
businesses are in debt and are really struggling.
Yeah.
But I hope to get that in the next few years at least, because it's so critical.
But then it's a thing of you would hope or like to think that something like that could be covered by, some state money or federal money or something, um, so that the businesses don't have to do it themselves, because it's not just for the benefit of people with physical disabilities with mobility aids. It's a benefit for everybody. It's great. There are some older people who can't walk up steps, that still want to come into your restaurant or shop in your store, but steps are a little difficult for them, or just for whatever reason. Mothers or parents with strollers with babies. It benefits so many other people besides those who have disabilities when your stores or businesses are accessible. So you would like to, like I said, you would like to think or hope that 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 cost wouldn't fall on the business owner themselves, like the township or whoever, the city would be able to cover those costs. Even though, I'm sure it could get very expensive, but uh, it's just a benefit. It's a benefit for your communities and for everybody. So good luck with that. And I'll
Yeah.
definitely be keeping an eye out for your progress on that. That sounds like a great idea. And
Thank you.
definitely something that needs to happen, nationwide and worldwide, even while we're at it.
I agree. Yeah. I think with the city of San Francisco, what they found is most places had an accessible entrance. At least it was flat and didn't have stairs to go into it, aside from the hilly parts of San Francisco.
Right.
But most of it is just adjusting door tensions and replacing the door handles.
Hmm.
Not a lot of places. It's typically not a huge ask or lift by a number of people, and then a temporary ramp is really inexpensive
Right.
for the most part.
Yeah.
So it's, at least from what I've seen, it's not, we're not asking businesses to invest, $20,000 in redoing, unless you do have serious infrastructure
Right.
barriers,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, I hope that we can pass that. It would be really awesome. And then also to your point about really benefits everyone, that's so critical and so true, because you have to think about situational, temporary, and permanent disabilities as well.
Yes.
And so, like, if it's situational, that could be you are leaving a bar and you're intoxicated and kind of drunk, and stairs are definitely not in your favor. You're probably going to trip on those stairs going down.
Hmm.
It would be helpful if there was a smooth and flat ramped entrance.
Yeah.
Temporary, you break your leg, now you're using crutches, or you're using one of those little wheelie things
Hmm.
for your knee to elevate. And
Right.
then permanent, people who use wheelchairs, walkers, canes on a regular basis. So you are benefiting everyone.
Yeah. And the thing is that people can you can become disabled at any time,
Yep.
for any reason, for multiple reasons. um so that's the other thing. It just, and I think people really pay attention to those types of things when they can relate to those types of things. If they have somebody in their life who has been affected by it, I know for myself, I have friends who I've known a long time. They'll send me, pictures when they go travel, and they're just like,
Oh,
"Would you
cool.
believe this sidewalk doesn't have a curb cut out?" Like, oh my gosh,
Oh, I
like,
love that.
like I don't believe this. Like, who do I talk to about this? Like, this is crazy.
That's when you know you have a strong following and a great network of
Yes,
allies.
yes. So
I
it's
love
just,
that.
yeah. So I get
I
those
get it
all the
on
time.
Twitter and it's so wonderful, right?
Yeah,
When
it
you
is.
have your non-disabled community and friends
They're like, who
sending
do
you
we
things
talk
of
to about this? Because this is
I know,
crazy.
right?
There's no
And
curb
I'm
cut
like,
out here.
talk to
Like,
311 or,
right.
go here, go there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I love when people send me things that
mhm.
are inaccessible and they're like, how can I fix this?
Part of doing this podcast, I always say, is my mission is to educate, raise awareness, and change the tone of conversation. And I was so happy when we connected that I saw that you also had a podcast, and it's Freewheeling with Carden. Love it.
Yes.
And I love
Thank
your
you.
I meant to say this earlier. I love your I guess your tagline of living life at 6 miles per hour.
Yeah, thank you.
That's so
I
great.
am I'm always rolling as fast as I can when I can. So it's so funny. I know like I live above a Whole Foods and I basically know all the Whole Foods workers because I'm in there like 3 days a week
Oh,
just to get
great.
like here. Like, I usually get like one or two things when I go into Whole Foods. So they know all of me and they know that I just zip in there at 1,000 miles an hour and they're like, Carden, you're back. You need to slow down. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I'm not going to run over people.
Right. I know what I'm doing.
I know what I'm doing.
So
Yeah.
can you tell us about your podcast,
Hmm.
how you started it, what kind of topics do you cover on your podcast, and last but not least, can you tell us where we can listen to your podcast?
Thank you. My
Yeah.
podcast, Freewheeling with Carden, is on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, iHeartRadio, really any place that you listen to your podcasts. And it shares stories of people with disabilities similar to Our View. And we help to break down barriers in the built environment and the digital environment. And we talk about stereotypes and stigmas, shine a light on people's stories because, people have a story and they want to tell it and they want to share how it impacts them. And then I like to focus a lot on corporate accommodations
Hmm.
and things to make things better. So, things like workplace accommodations, hiring inclusively, event accommodations, and kind of asking people in your for the type of disability that you have, what would be beneficial for you? How can other people help you? Because I think the other narrative is that a lot of times people with disabilities don't like asking for help and
Hmm.
so the problem with that is that it has a negative impact on people who are non-disabled, who are event planners, who are high up the food chain in corporations, and they don't know how to structure policy and provide accommodations when no one tells you what they need to put in those accommodations.
Right.
And not a lot of times people with disabilities don't know how to ask for specific things that they need for help. So I try to provide some transparency in that so whoever's listening can think about creating accessible things if it's events or inside the workplace and why it's helpful for them. And I post episodes weekly. And yeah, that's freewheeling.
That's
Oh, and
great.
freewheeling with Carden started in March of 2020, so a year ago. I actually was planning to launch it without knowing that COVID was hitting, and I took a podcasting course through a coworker's Press Play podcasting course. It's kind of a handful of press play podcasting course. And that's how I learned how to record, get the microphone, get the recording applications and launch a podcast within 8 weeks. So it was really
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah, that's great. I have listened to a few of your episodes. It's really really good, and it's great conversation, and I love that the breaking down of the stereotypes, and just I think just having conversations is a great place to start. It's how we learn and how we educate ourselves about what real challenges that people with disabilities face, and how we can all work together. Everybody has something in them that they can contribute to help to help with these issues that are facing people with disabilities. And so to have a podcast like yours where you do address uh great topics, and have guests on to talk about different things that they're creating and different things that they're a part of to help better the lives of those who have disabilities, and just everybody in general, I think is it's always a good thing to share these types of podcasts with people. So thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, thanks. And
Yeah.
the guests that I interview are people with disabilities, people who are allies of people with disabilities, so like inventors, and have interviewed caretakers. So I kind of try to approach it through all different avenues of people that touch the lives of people with disabilities, because it's not just the focus is on people with disabilities, but the ally network is so critical for making that change
For
and
getting things
creating a
done.
better
Yeah.
world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I listened earlier today. I listened to your episode with the gentleman, I forget his name, that had the ASL um, app.
Yeah,
That was,
Pierre.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was really
We hear
really.
you.
Yes, we hear you, ASL. That was that was really great. And like you said, it's about the allyship of it,
Yeah.
of bringing in everybody to be a part of this conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
to assist with making these changes. So it's really great work again that you're doing, and thank you for that. And just keep up everything that you're doing. It's really really exciting uh, to see people working so hard to make changes that need to be done, that are way overdue to be done, I think.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's just it's like we have this world, this space that we're living in, and it's like we have to continue to help and figure out ways to make it better for for everybody to live. So the
Thank you,
work.
Arthur. And
Yeah.
thank you for your leadership and just all the work that you're doing to continue to promote the narrative of creating a more accessible and inclusive world for disabilities. So,
Yeah.
find us on Clubhouse.
Yes.
What's your Clubhouse
I'm
at
I'm at
mention?
our view for on
At
Clubhouse.
OurView on
Yes.
Clubhouse, and I'm at Carden of Milk. I should probably change it to Freewheeling with Carden, but Carden of Milk is my Instagram and my Twitter handle.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, so it's been really great to connect again. It's been really great to connect with
You're
people on
welcome.
Clubhouse, to just share our stories and our experiences, and just knowing that people, it goes back to what you said before about the isolation and feeling isolated, but
Mhm.
to be able to connect. Clubhouse is it's very different than the other social media networks, where you have to type out your responses, that they have walls and you can post on somebody's timeline and that kind of thing. But to be able to actually use your voice, and
Yeah.
to hear the passion that people have in the work that they're doing, is really inspiring. That's really inspiring, because you can
Hmm.
really tell that people mean, and they stand behind the stuff that they're doing. And to be able to connect with a great network of people on that app over the last few months has been really great, and has really, like, again, inspired me, and really just lit a fire in me to, like, keep going and to keep doing the work that I'm doing, and keep putting out stories like yours and others that I have interviewed on the podcast, just to let people know that we're out here and we're doing cool, fun things, and
Heck
we're
yeah.
yeah, and we're working hard to we're working hard to make changes. So
Right.
and there's space
And
for everybody, and like come on and join us. And even if you don't
mhm.
have a disability, like like Carden said, we need these allies. We need our friends, our family, our network of people
Yeah.
outside of the disability community to join us in this, and bring it to people's attention when things aren't accessible. There's always more work to do, so there is the
Mhm.
definite need for people like yourself and myself to continue uh, doing that work. So again, thank you for that. And to wrap up the episode, I would just like to end with this last question, and that is, what is the most common misconception about your disability diagnosis? Or you can address it as, a misconception that people have about people with disabilities in general.
I think the most common misconception for my type of muscular dystrophy is the lack of strong facial muscles. And so things like smiling and uh, being able to just look animated is difficult. And so I'm not here with like a resting bad face,
Hmm.
and I'm not here, and I try to not look unexcited,
Hmm.
but when my face can only move so far and make as only as big of expressions as it can. I think I get a lot of like when strangers are taking my picture and I'm smiling as big as I can, they're like, "Come on now, smile. You can smile. Open up your
Uh,
mouth." And it's like, yeah, it just, yeah, I can't do that because
yeah,
so, and it sometimes gets old having to explain that. But I think you just have to continue to spread that awareness and hope for a cure, which is coming in the next 5 years or so to help stop that progression.
yeah, yeah. That's a really great thing to mention, because it's you don't, again, like we talked about when we first started, when you hear of muscular dystrophy, you may have a certain image in your mind of what that looks
Mm-hmm.
like based off of the old school, the telethons they used to do back in the 80s
Right.
and 90s, and I think they're still doing them in some form today. And that's not always what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And your specific type that you have is something different. And so it's just again extending the kindness to everybody, which is just being kind to everybody, because you never know what kind of struggles they're facing in life, and what what they're able to do. So I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's a very good thing to mention. So thanks for that. I appreciate
I
it.
think the other thing with this type of muscular dystrophy is that it's so slow to progress over time. So
Hmm.
for those that knew me in elementary and middle school and even high school, I didn't use a wheelchair. But
Right.
after college, I started using a wheelchair. So if I were to go back to my elementary school reunion, a lot of people that I haven't connected with since then would be surprised, and they would probably say, what happened to you? And it's like, well, this was always a part of me. I didn't show symptoms when I was that
Right.
young, or at least noticeably the physical. So, and a similar narrative for those that they can go 40 years of their life and are walking just fine, and then realize that they're starting to see some weakness in their body and
Hmm.
lifting heavy things and no longer being able to walk very well. So that's another thing, is that this disease shows up so differently for every single individual. And like I said, only about 10% show it in early infantile onset, but most of this is an adult onset later in life.
Right.
So you could go 40 years, 30 years looking, quote, normal and being able to walk and play sports. But after that, it's, um, so we see a lot of people that get diagnosed mid middle age.
Mm-hmm.
And they're surprised. And they're like, wow, I
Right.
had no idea I had this.
Yeah. That's I think, and that's the again, it goes back to the how everything is unique, and it can
Mm.
be different and look different, and the diagnosis can come at a different time for everybody. So it's and again, goes back to what we've been saying of the importance of educating about different types of disabilities and what they actually mean, because you hear these terms, you hear these phrases, but you don't know exactly what it means and what the impact is and what the effect that these diagnoses have on someone's life. And as you said, it affects your muscles and all of that. So it really just again, sharing your story like this and other places that we are able to have a platform to share our stories and share our post on social media and share uh, the information that people don't have. Well, everybody has access to it because there is Google, thank goodness. Um, but they wouldn't otherwise just voluntarily look it up and research it for themselves. So to use our platforms to raise awareness about these types of disabilities and diagnoses, I think is very, very much needed and very important.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. I really appreciate our time and our conversation.
Yes, me too. I really did. And I'll definitely hopefully catch you on Clubhouse sometime soon. If there's anything that I can help you out with, just let me know and I will
Okay, will do.
it. And you have a good rest of your evening.
You too. Bye.
All
I'll see you
right.
on
Thank you.
Clubhouse.
All right. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the OurView Podcast. Leave us a review wherever you listen and let us know what you liked about this episode. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to follow us on all social media platforms for more disability-related content at OurView for Life. That's OurView, the number 4, LIFE. If you listen to this episode on your phone, take a screenshot and post it to your Instagram or Facebook stories and be sure to tag us. We thank you for listening and take care.